Hi everyone, welcome to the March 8th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Mulkowski, and we are looking back at last weekend's racing from around the country, and there was a lot of top-level racing to talk about, including a trio of Kentucky Derby preps taking place all around the country. Actually, there was a fourth taking place at Turfway Park that we're not going to get to. They got a bit of a lower speed figure, but the three that did take place on the dirt, all graded stakes races offering 50 Kentucky Derby qualifying points to the winner of those races, I think produced some contenders for the Kentucky Derby. Craig and I will dissect which ones we think are actually going to be legitimate players by the first Saturday in May, but it does feel like that Derby picture is slowly but surely starting to take shape. And we also had some Kentucky Oaks preps that produced some nice performances, including a race at Aqueduct that got a nice speed figure and an eye-catching performance that I know a lot of people were pretty high on down at Gulfstream Park. Beyond those Derby and Oaks preps, there were also plenty of Grade 1 races at Santa Anita, including the Santa Anita Handicap. We'll go through some of those races from Southern California this past weekend. We'll also talk about all of the undercard races at Gulfstream, and there were quite a few of them that were stakes, graded stakes actually, on the turf and on the dirt. That was highlighted by a big performance from Speaker's Corner in the Gulfstream Park Mile. We'll talk about that and some of those turf stakes that were won by some Chad Brown and Mike Maker trainees. And then we'll finish things up by talking about a couple of races from Aqueduct on that Gotham Day undercard that did achieve some notable speed figures. But Craig, as I was saying, it does feel like that Derby picture is starting to take shape. Still a lot to be determined, but things looked so murky coming into this weekend. I did think that we started to get a few answers.
Yeah, I think we saw a couple really good performances. The Fountain of Youth was obviously marred a little bit by the spill. Personally, I'm not sure how strong that race was, but the San Felipe I liked, as I did the Gotham, which is a bit of an upset because I wasn't really expecting that going in.
Well, let's start with that San Felipe, the race that did get the highest TimeformUS speed figure of those three Kentucky Derby preps that we're going to talk about. This one run in the middle of the day on Saturday at Santa Anita, going the mile and a 16th distance. And I think the big question coming in, Craig, was could Forbidden Kingdom get the distance? Because if you were looking at the TimeformUS speed figures, he had a significant advantage coming into the race from a speed figure standpoint, but he had gotten big pace bonuses in his sprint races, wondering if he could do the same thing in a dirt route, and I think he answered that with a resounding yes, as he just ran this field off its feet and I think really established himself as a top contender heading towards the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah, I would say no doubt about it that he did. It was a really nice effort from him. He went pretty fast early, which was not a surprise if you saw his pace figures in those prior sprint races, but he actually was able to rate decently around 2 turns, and he finished up the race just fine. So I think he really thrust himself maybe right to the top when you consider the only other horse who's ran a faster speed figure than him isn't eligible for the Kentucky Derby right now. I would say he had to move to the top of the pack.
And if we're looking at the recent history of the Kentucky Derby, horses with this kind of running style, early speed that can kind of run their foes into the ground and keep going, that style has proven to be very dangerous in recent Kentucky Derbies. I mean, I'm thinking of horses like Maximum Security, who obviously was disqualified, but who did cross the wire first with similar tactics. Justify, especially, Always Dreaming. I'm sure there are some other more recent examples. But horses that can go fast in the Derby and keep going, they're pretty dangerous because they often avoid a lot of that traffic trouble that horses in behind do encounter. So I think Forbidden Kingdom is definitely a dangerous runner moving on, and we'll see if that matchup that seems like it's on the horizon does materialize in the Santa Anita Derby between Forbidden Kingdom and Messier, two horses with similar running styles who are both coming off the biggest speed figures that we've seen on this Derby trail so far. Obviously, there's some uncertainty about Messier actually getting into the Kentucky Derby, or whether there'll be a trainer switch, or I haven't seen any reporting about that, but Forbidden Kingdom, not a horse that I'd want to tangle with on the front end.
No, and you make a good point about speed in the Derby. A lot of people fall into that trap because of the longer distance, looking for horses that are making runs at the end, and it just doesn't seem to materialize very often. Even a horse like Country House, who was elevated to the win, kind of looked like a big closer going in, but that day he was right up pretty close to the pace. So I definitely think, as always, speed is a weapon in any dirt race, and the Kentucky Derby is really no.
Yeah, in this one, Craig, the San Felipe, I don't have a whole lot to say about the horses that were in behind. Doppelganger, I thought, got a pretty good trip, had his chance, just was no match for Forbidden Kingdom. Happy Jack, a horse that I've kind of had a thing for, I thought wasn't disgraced in the finishing third, but he was obviously no match for the top two, and the others just kind of disappointing. I mean, the one other horse I would point out is Armagnac, who fated to finish sixth in this race, beaten almost 30 lengths, and he was the one that was doing the chasing early, and you could see what Forbidden Kingdom did to him. I mean, he was just basically walking across the finish line because he was so tired. So not an easy horse to duel with. So it'll be interesting to see what he does in subsequent prep races and in the Kentucky Derby itself.
Yeah, and just the last thing for me on it, to kind of put into perspective how good Forbidden Kingdom was, the runner-up Doppelganger, that 111 speed figure, would have been really competitive in a race like the Rebel that we talked about just last week, and he was beaten a good almost 6 lengths in here.
Now, Craig, as you mentioned, the big prep at Gulfstream Park, the Grade 2 Fountain of Youth, going the mile on the 16th distance, did unfortunately feature an incident at the quarter pole. I've seen the reporting that the horses are okay, the riders are generally okay, maybe a little bruised and banged up, but everyone is going to come out of it with no serious injuries, so that's good news. But it was kind of a roughly run race, hard to really place the blame on one specific person or horse, just given the video angles. I think we all kind of have a suspicion about who caused it, but it's hard to really say that definitively looking at the evidence that was available to us right after the race, and the stewards did not choose to make a disqualification. But moving on beyond all of that, just to talk about the performances, simplification, I think he proved that he's not some one-dimensional speed horse. He kind of hinted at that in the Holy Bull when he didn't break well and came from off the pace. And in this Fountain of Youth, it seemed like they just elected to come from off the pace, and he handled it pretty well, and I thought got a decent trip to win.
Yeah, he ran fine. He wound up winning pretty easily. Spill or no spill, I don't think anybody else was going to beat him. Even it's hard to say the horses that went down what they would have done, but it looked like he was going to win the race before that happened. And I thought he ran fine, but it's a pretty slow race. I know maybe some other speed figure makers will disagree, but there were a lot of dirt races on the card on Saturday, and I didn't have a big issue with this figure. He's only going to get a 107 from me. As I look through the chart, it wasn't like I saw a bunch of horses regressing, so I'm pretty sold that this is not a very good group of 3-year-olds in Florida. Maybe time will prove me wrong. I mean, White Abarrio, he did win easily last time, so maybe he would be the one. But from this field, I wasn't overly impressed personally. I do want to give you a small shout out for tabbing O Captain on the forecast, and I thought he ran pretty good at a ridiculous 87-1. And I don't mean it's ridiculous odds, just that he was able to run so well with those odds. You called that he would want the 2 turns and liked what I saw, but personally, I don't think any of these horses are Kentucky Derby contenders.
Yeah, that trifecta helped out my weekend a little bit in the Fountain of Youth, as that horse was kind of a ridiculous price. But, I think in talking about O Captain, Craig, I saw some people giving Emmanuel an excuse in this race for losing ground, but I'd be a little bit hesitant to do that because this was just one of those weird races that had a pronounced outside flow to it. It seemed like every horse that was successful did all of its running once it got to the outside part of the track. And I'm not saying that the rail was dead or anything like that, but I think there were some horses that were getting tired down inside. There was a lot more traffic down inside. Horses that tried to come up the rail just ended up getting shuffled back. So I don't want to give a horse like Emmanuel too much credit. And he was the beaten favorite in this race. I don't want to give him too much credit for losing ground around the turns when the other horses that were successful did too. So I think he was just a little bit disappointing, and he's the one that I could kind of point to that maybe didn't live up to the hype in this race.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, the pace was much like the race. It was just kind of okay. It certainly wasn't fast, whether you're using pace figures like I make or just looking at the raw fractions. I mean, you don't see a lot of mile and a 16th races at Gulfstream Park go with a half mile over 48 seconds. So for me, that kind of mitigates the ground loss a little bit. He wasn't going all that fast, and I like to use that analogy. If you walk around the track, you can keep up on the far outside with somebody on the inside with very minimal effort. And it just didn't seem like he ran all that great to me.
Now, Craig, at risk of spending too much time on this race, but I think it's okay because a lot of people are most interested in these Derby preps at this time of year. I just want to kind of break down the speed figures briefly because I know some people are curious as to why, if we're going to compare it to the Beyer speed figures for this race, you'd have the Holy Bull and the Fountain of Youth getting numbers of, I think, 97 and 96. And you have both races about roughly 10 points lower. I think Gulfstream did no favors to the speed figures by carding both the Holy Bull and the Fountain of Youth as the only two-turn dirt races on each of those cards. I think that I don't see the O notation on Saturday's card, but I believe it was the only two-turn dirt race. And I know that makes it a little bit difficult because sometimes the two-turn races at Gulfstream do play a little bit differently than the one-turn races. And I know, I would imagine for the Saturday card, Beyer would have had to break out that race to get the number as high as it was because it was significantly slower than the one-turn races. But sometimes when you kind of make that decision in a prior race, the number, you have to project it a little bit off what the horses ran the previous time. So it kind of makes sense that each of you would have those numbers in line with your previous numbers. But I think some people might just be curious about why those two diverge so much.
Yeah, I haven't really looked at what Beyer did. I know he has them a little higher than I do, and you're correct. Both days they were the only route, but I mean, Gulfstream does run enough races that you get a pretty good understanding of the relationship between the one and two turn races. And for me, on both days, it would have had to been a breakout of pretty big proportions to make those races as fast as Beyer has them. I'm not saying it's always possible he's right and I'm wrong. But there is literally nothing when I looked at the worksheet that would tell me to make that race faster than what I've rated it, other than just making a guess. I mean, it's not like we just go by the winner or the top couple. We look through the whole field and kind of compare it to the other races. And honestly, it's a figure I didn't give a second thought to. It was that easy. That's why it doesn't have the O notation. I only really use that if I think it was the only race and it was a difficult figure to make, which I didn't see here.
Yeah, I'll be honest, just from my perspective, nothing about the speed figure that you gave the Fountain of Youth stands out as being out of whack. It looks like it's right in line with the numbers the horses should be running. I know sometimes 3-year-olds can improve at this time of year, but I'm starting to wonder if maybe this group of 3-year-olds down at Gulfstream Park this winter is just not the strongest compared to some other circuits. Craig, let's move on to the Grade 3 Gotham. Obviously, this was the one-turn prep of the weekend, going that mile distance, whereas the San Felipe and the Fountain of Youth ran a mile and a 16th around two turns. The Gotham looked to me like a pretty competitive race coming in, but the public didn't think so, as they made Morello the even money favorite, and he certainly ran to that backing as he just traveled like a winner the entire way around the track and opened up to win this race pretty easily.
Yeah, this was an impressive performance for me. I didn't really I didn't handicap this race too much. I know we didn't talk about it on the show until the day of, and I just wasn't sure what to do with a horse like him. But man, he sure looked good to me, and I don't think it was any fluke. The public wasn't fooled at all. He handled the stretch out an additional furlong easily, and he's one that seems to have a pretty bright future. He got a 114 TimeformUS speed figure for the effort, and yeah, I look forward to seeing him in the wood and trying the two turns. I'll leave it to you how much of an issue you think that'll be, but nothing I saw on Saturday would make me think he couldn't handle it.
Yeah, Morello is by a first crop sire in Classic Empire, so I think we're still learning a little bit about the Classic Empire progeny and how far they want to go. We have seen some of them be pretty precocious, but Classic Empire himself, I mean, a horse that nearly won the Preakness, Breeders' Cup Juvenile winner, he certainly could go long, so I don't see any reason why his progeny shouldn't want to go classic distances. We'll see what we get from Morello. Obviously, they've been stretching him out kind of furlong by furlong, going from the 6 to the 7, now to the 1-turn mile, and will do the same thing in his next race as they announced they'll be targeting the Wood Memorial for his final prep, going the mile and an eighth at that same Aqueduct racetrack. He'll have made all of his starts at Aqueduct heading to the Kentucky Derby for whatever people want to make of that. I know sometimes people prefer horses that have a bit more experience at different racetracks, but I agree, Craig. Morello has looked good in all three of his starts, and he's just continued to progress from a speed figure standpoint. I think there's nothing not to like about this horse based on what he's done on the racetrack racetrack so far. He's got good tactical speed, but he certainly doesn't need the lead, as he rated pretty kindly in the Winkfield last time, and then once again here in the Gotham. I thought he was an underlay at even money, but the way things played out in the racetrack, it didn't seem to be the case. As for those that finished behind him, Craig, Todd Pletcher had the second and third place finishers in Dean's List and Golden Code. I thought that Dean's List ran a pretty game second, but wonder if he's just a horse that's ultimately not going to really appreciate the added ground. He could be more of a 7 furlong type, and there are some good graded stakes races going that distance later in the year if Todd Pletcher does not want to continue to stretch him out in distance. And the New York bred Golden Code, I thought he ran fine to be third.
Yeah, they ran okay. I'm on your side. I think this is probably the limit of Dean's List distance limitations. But he ran fine, but I don't see him as one that would be a threat going forward to a race like the Wood. I wouldn't blame the connections if they gave him a shot, but it's hard to imagine him turning the tables with even an extra furlong. So it'll be interesting to see where he shows up. I think he could be a really good sprinter. I know we've talked about him before.
Since we're talking about Aqueduct, let's switch right over to the Oaks Preps and begin with the Oaks Prep that took place at Aqueduct just before the Gotham, the Busher Stakes, going that same 1 mile distance. And you know, Craig, I've seen some people talking about the Oaks horses coming out of this weekend, and I know a lot of people were impressed by Kathleen O, who we're going to talk about in a little bit, but the horse that I'd be really upgrading in my Oaks estimation is Venti Valentine, the winner of the Busher, because, I mean, what was not to like about this performance? She was facing a field that looked okay coming in. I know it wasn't a large field, just 5 runners, but, I mean, she just smashed them. I mean, she ran away from them pretty impressively late to win by 7 lengths and got a speed figure that's right in line with the numbers that Secret Oath has been running.
Yeah, and the good thing about this day at Aqueduct was, other than the very first race, which we'll talk about towards the end of the show, it was an atypical, very easy day for speed figure making. It was a day where I used the same variant for every single race on the card and didn't have a lot of trepidation in doing so. So I've got no problem. It was easy to compare the time of this race to the time of the Gotham. It compares really favorably, and she did everything right. I always like the horses that are able to track the pace and sit close up, so that we know they have speed, but that they're also rateable. And the way she powered away in the stretch was impressive to see. As you say, I don't think there was a whole lot in behind her. Magic Circle is just okay, but she wasn't able to even hold second. Radio Days was basically terrible, despite having a very similar trip. They were both about the same, with just a little bit off the pace. So absolutely nothing for me not to like. I think the 113 speed figure is totally legit.
Yeah, the thing that stands out for me looking at the pace figure line of this race is the way that Venti Valentine really ratcheted up the pressure coming around the far turn, and you can kind of see that when she made the leader, Magic Circle, have to go from a 108 pace figure at the second call all the way up to a 120 at the third call. That's kind of going from the half-mile pole to the three-quarter pole or I should say the half-mile pole to the quarter pole, and that's where Venti Valentine really won the race, because she kind of broke the two horses who were inside, Magic Circle, who was setting the pace, and that horse that you mentioned, Radio Days, who was the heavy favorite, who came off the bridle with about 3/8 of a mile to go and just really had no answer in the stretch. And Venti Valentine was the one that showed the stamina to keep going, and she got the 1 1/8 as a 2-year-old in the Demoiselle, so I think that bodes well for her stretching out again, likely next time out in the Gazelle and then on to the Kentucky Oaks. And I like this filly quite a bit. I know she's a New York bred, and maybe goes out for some lower profile connections that haven't won a lot of big races yet, but I think she's pretty talented.
Yeah, no doubt. She's done very little wrong in her career. It makes her 3 for 4 now. And she certainly seemed to have matured and taken that big step forward, even off that very good Demoiselle.
Let's go back to Gulfstream Park to talk about that Oaks Prep that took place on the Fountain of Youth card a bit earlier in the day, the Grade 2 Devon Dale, this one going that same 1 mile distance as the Busher. And Craig, from a visual standpoint, I get why people were really taken with Kathleen O's performance. She's an exciting horse to watch run. She just kind of walks out of the gate, is at the back of the pack early, likes to go from last to first in her races, so those are always fun horses to root for, but she's just not running the fastest speed figures that really put her in the mix as a major Oaks player.
No, she's not. I mean, she's progressing. She's improved her TimeformUS speed figure each time out. Unfortunately, they're just not all that fast. And unlike the Fountain of Youth, This was a race where there were plenty other races to compare it to. The mile races are a little bit tricky at Gulfstream. They don't time them that great, but we do time them all from video. So there were some others, including Speaker's Corner, that we'll talk about a little later, that made it for an easy comparison. And yeah, she looks good visually, but that 102 speed figure is not going to get it done. But maybe she's the kind that's going to get better with more distance. That's a trap people can fall into with big closers like this. I'm not saying it's out of the question, but she's going to be a short price moving forward, and not one I'm sure I'd want a big part of, to be honest.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. I thought that this looked like a high-quality race coming in. There were some horses that looked like they had quite a bit of promise. The runner-up Classy Edition, who I thought ran pretty well, trying to come up the rail. Girl with a Dream, the horse that had beaten Radio Days in her prior start with a big speed figure. Maybe that's just coming back as maybe not the strongest race, as both of those horses significantly regressed off that speed figure that Girl with a Dream got. She was a non-factor in this race. So Kathleen O, I think that she was helped by some no-shows, but she did run well. As you said, she's been progressing in every start, but like you were alluding to, sometimes these horses that make those big closing runs around one turn, not as effective as people think they might be when the paces get a little bit moderate as they stretch out to two turns. So we'll see what we get from her, but I do think she's going to have to start progressing and moving forward in her subsequent starts to put herself in the upper echelon of the 3-year-old fillies. And let's finish up the Kentucky Oaks preps by talking about a race from Santa Anita on Sunday, the Grade 3 Santa Isabel. Craig, I feel like Ida, the winner of this race, is a horse that's kind of been flying under the radar for Bob Baffert. I kind of had forgotten about her when she came into this race, but she's now 5 for 7 in her career. She won a Grade 1. This is a podcast, so you can't see me making the quotation marks with my hands, but a Grade 1 in the Los Alameda, or the Starlet at the end of last year. Came back in this race and beat her stablemate, but obviously she's one of many horses that cannot receive Kentucky Oaks points in the Bob Baffert stable.
Yeah, who knows what's going to happen with her. This is 4 wins in a row for her, I believe. So she's obviously doing a lot of things right. But yeah, it's hard to say. No way to know how to judge these kind going forward. Her speed figure was decent. It wasn't as good as Venti Valentine, but it was better than Kathleen O. She got a 110. Hard to say. The pace was pretty moderate. The horse tracking her was another stablemate. Those two were never going to get into a duel, and there wasn't really a whole lot behind them. So she's just okay at this point, and honestly, I don't want to spend a lot of time worrying about it until we know she's going to either change barns or just not be a factor in the Oaks.
Yeah, I have the same feelings. The majority of the Oaks points in this race were scooped up by Baffert, or were I guess I should say vacated, because Baffert trainees did well. So yeah, not a whole lot to add to that one. But Craig, let's stick with Santa Anita and talk about some of the other graded stakes races that took place there, mostly on Saturday. The feature race on their Saturday card was obviously the big cap, the Grade 1 Santa Anita Handicap. I wouldn't say it was the strongest edition of this race that we've ever seen, probably not even close to that. But Express Train, he's been a pretty solid horse for John Sheriffs and seems like he's got him in great form right now. He won his 2 preps for this, and he parlayed that into a Grade 1 victory going the 10 furlongs, which has proven elusive for him in the past.
I was really hoping you were going to mention the sponsor, which Frank Miramati did a couple times. And no offense to Frank, he's a great announcer, but it seemed like it took like a 16th of a mile for him to get the sponsor in. So I'm not going to do that. But yeah, it was a solid effort by Express Train. The one thing that really struck me was I was a little worried that big jump in his speed figure came last time because it looked like he was running over a rail favoring, speed favoring track, but he actually ran a point faster here with a 127 TimeformUS speed figure. There were a good 3 dirt routes to go on in this card, so I think it's solid, and it may just be a case that at 5, he's reached his potential. You know, he's kind of running as fast as he ever has, a little bit faster even. So he's got to be right up near the top of the handicap division. Who knows what to make of the horses that were over in Saudi, and I'm sure we'll have a few in Dubai. But it's not like all those horses outside of maybe Life is Good are consistently running 130 TimeformUS speed figures. So I'd say right now he has to be a force in the division.
Yeah, I think horses like this are easy to root for. He was just kind of ordinary as a 2-year-old and 3-year-old, but he's really come to hand later in his career, and it seems like John Shirves has him going well right now. Shirves was even saying in his quotes coming out of the race that he's been sounder than he's ever been before. It seems like he's coming out of his races doing really well, so he's been able to run him more consistently than he has in the past, and that often makes a difference for horses like this. That sometimes they have problems earlier in their career, have trouble staying on the racetrack, and those things have a way of sorting themselves out a little bit later. So nice to see patient connections like that get rewarded for kind of taking the prudent route with a horse like this. And they got that Grade 1 victory on Saturday. I thought the runner-up Warrant ran pretty well for Brad Cox. Craig, I believe the Oklahoma Derby winner. Am I right about that? He did pretty well in this race and was game taking that run at Express Train late, but just couldn't quite get past him.
Yeah, he was the Oklahoma Derby winner, and he came back in the Grade 3, and now I'm the one using air quotes because even though that was listed as a Grade 3, it was Mandaloon and Midnight Bourbon, two probably Grade 1 horses for sure, who beat him that day, and I thought he ran really good race. I also thought he got a great ride by Flavien Prat, which is no real surprise, and I do think he moves horses up there quite a bit, by a few lengths at least, so maybe that was part of it, but he took a big step forward. He had run a 120 speed figure last time, elevated that a little bit more here, so he looks like a horse who's developing nicely as well.
Yeah, I guess if there was a disappointment in this race, it was Stiletto Boy, a horse that I like to root for because he's kind of an overachiever, but he didn't quite run back to that performance that he put forth in the Pegasus World Cup last time. We actually saw a couple of horses that were third and fourth in the Pegasus World Cup this weekend come back and not quite match the speed figures they got in that race, so we'll see if that means anything moving forward, but Stiletto Boy was a distant third here.
Yeah, for sure. He's a favorite of mine. I thought the betting got a little bit carried away, making him 2-1 in here. I was expecting more, so luckily that probably saved me some money. You're exactly right about the Pegasus. Those are really tough races to rate. The pace was fast, and sometimes they're just kind of, for the people who follow harness racing out there, some races just seem to have a way of giving suck up kind of speed figures, and I'm starting, I think I had even mentioned that on the forecast that I thought maybe it was the case, but the other horse we talked about, it was worth taking a shot, but so far it's looking that way.
You know, Craig, we had kind of gone back and forth about whether to do Santa Anita or Gulfstream on the forecast last week, and kind of glad we didn't choose Santa Anita because some of these races turned out to be a little bit chalky. The one that looked most interesting from a handicapping standpoint was the Kilroe Mile with that field of 11 runners, but the top 5 choices in the betting finished 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you never like to see that from a wagering standpoint. But I mean, I do want to give props to Count Again, who I thought got a great ride from Flavien Prat. And it's just a horse that has kind of been knocking on the door for a while. So good to see him get a Grade 1 victory here. And he just has a really potent late kick in these races.
Yeah, he, as you said, this was a race where I do think Flavien Prat made the difference. He was able to save ground and just timed his run perfectly. He got a really nice 125 TimeformUS speed figure for the win. I still have my questions about some of these horses out in California on the turf, if they're really worthy of the Grade 1 status that gets bestowed upon them in a lot of their turf races. But he's definitely one of the, if not the leader of the mile division out there now.
Yeah, I think we could go into a more concerning conversation about the state of California racing if we really wanted to. And as you mentioned, Flavien Prat, there was that news that broke this week that he and also Umberto Rispoli will be leaving Southern California to head to New York to try their hands at success there. You know, for Flavien Prat, that's important for him getting considered as potential champion jockey at the Eclipse Awards, because I think it's been established at this point, a rider based in Southern California can't win the Eclipse Award. There just aren't enough races. And the Grade 1s, they just don't carry the same weight as some other jurisdictions. So I think things are not trending the right way for some of these Southern California Grade 1s. And frankly, the Kilroe was among the stronger ones that we saw this past weekend. So yeah, I don't have a too lot positive to say on that front. But I thought the top 3 in this race, they all got very good rides. Space Traveler, Craig, I feel like he is going to have a big win on his agenda somewhere, because he's just been slowly but surely getting better for Brendan Walsh, and he just missed in this race. It was a heartbreaker.
Yeah, he is a horse that definitely seems to be moving in the right direction. He's run some big speed figures. Just hasn't been able to get the job done. But I would totally agree with you. If you keep putting up numbers like he is, he's going to win a big race somewhere along the line.
Yeah, and as I kind of tee off that discussion about the quality of Grade 1 races, I think that's a perfect segue into the Beholder Mile. As time goes by, she got her first Grade 1 here, Craig. I don't really know what it means because there wasn't a whole lot of competition, especially once Envoûtante just, you could see right from the start, did not look like herself. It was just kind of a three-horse race, and as time goes by, just better than this field.
Yeah, who knows what happened with Envoûtante because she was a non-factor from the start. That had to be disappointing for Ken McPeak. I'm sure he didn't ship all the way to California expecting that. And once it happened, I mean, the race was over. She was probably the only horse that really had any speed as time goes by, was able to go on for a fairly easy win. I guess some people thought maybe Miss Bigley looked like she might get there, but I never really got that impression. Her speed figure regressed a little bit from her prior out. Maybe that was the racetrack. Maybe it was just doing what she needed to do. She only got a 116 for this win, and yeah, just not the best Grade 1 we're ever going to see.
Yeah, she's run some big speed figures. For some reason, I just don't really view her as being, in the same breath as the Latruscas or even a horse like She Dares the Devil, some of the top players in this division right now. So we'll see if that changes this year as time goes by. Obviously, a horse with a lot of pedigree. She's very well bred, being out of that damn Take Charge Lady. But I feel like we've seen what she has to offer at this point. So she just did what she had to do in this Beholder Mile. Bob Baffert picked up another graded stakes victory earlier in the day with Cezanne in the Grade 2 San Carlos, this one going 7 furlongs. Cezanne, a horse that cost, I believe, $3.65 million as a 2-year-old. They've had some trouble keeping him on the racetrack. That's certainly been the case, but he was second off a layoff here and did take a step forward off his return.
Yeah, once Brickyard Ride scratched out of this race, I think it kind of took some of the luster out. He would have been coming back in just a couple weeks, turning back off a mile effort, so it really wasn't surprising. But when the second choice in the race is Shoot or Shoot, who's a decent enough horse, but I don't think anybody's going to confuse him with a Breeders' Cup type sprinter. You knew it wasn't going to be much, and people were just hoping, I guess, that Cezanne was going to rebound from a not very good performance last time out. He did have a bit of an excuse for the pace, and he certainly ran better second time out. So not sure where he stacks up at this point. He did run a pretty decent speed figure in here, a 123. It was a little bit of a tricky day. There wasn't a lot of dirt races. There were only 2 sprints. This one and the other, a maiden race, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes, while the others were all routes. So this one looked pretty consistent, but even so, I have my doubts about this one, despite the 123 speed figure. I'm going to bet that number going forward with a little trepidation.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And sometimes when the competition doesn't run that deep in these races, it allows a superior horse to run a higher speed figure than they otherwise might be able to. Cezanne, a horse by Curlin that's certainly bred to go longer. I think it's interesting that Baffert has kept him going shorter distances for the majority of his career. Maybe part of that is the fact that he just clearly has some soundness issues because they can't keep him on the racetrack. So interesting to see if he's able to finally put a full campaign together. Craig, as you were mentioning, the other sprint race on the dirt on Saturday at Santa Anita was that maiden race 2, won by the Bob Baffert first-time starter Taiba. And I mean, one of the fastest debut speed figures that we've seen over the past year, or even going back for a number of years, at least from the final time standpoint, getting that 127 final time speed figure knocked down a little bit due to the slow pace. But boy, this horse looked pretty good.
He did, and it was a tough figure. If you look at our chart, you'll see like the first 5 or 6 horses all ran triple-digit speed figures, which is a race which would give me a little pause, but my assistant did the exact same thing I would have done, and lacking any other evidence, he used the same variant that he did for the San Carlos. They were only 2 races apart on the card, so not really much else to go on. He certainly looked the part visually. He's going to get a 121 after that pace adjustment, but he was just running away from the field at the end. I mean, the margin was 7.5. If they'd have been going 7 furlongs, it would have probably been 20 because he was just that impressive. So it'll be interesting to see what this one does going forward, where he's going to show up next, because in a normal year, you would think he would be rushed onto the Derby trail, but who knows what they're going to do with this one.
Yeah, I'm sure connections of horses in California are hoping that he's not rushed onto the Derby trail, because a horse that appears to be this talented could scoop up some, or I guess take away some Derby points that others might be looking to earn. But yeah, we'll see how good he ultimately proves to be. There is some uncertainty about this race, as you were saying, with so many first-time starters involved. You could never have full confidence that the race is as fast as it seems to be, but this one certainly has been cut out to be good right from the start. Amr Zidane, the owner of Medina Spirit, did not pay more than $35,000 for this one. Shelled out $1.7 million to buy this one as a 2-year-old in training. By Gunrunner, the dam, an Ohio bred, need more flattery. She won multiple stakes races. I think was a 2-time champion Ohio bred. So kind of an interesting pedigree there. Gunrunner bred to that kind of regional star to produce this horse. And as you were saying, Craig, he ran through the wire of this race kind of like he was actually picking up steam and not slowing down. So feels like one that's ultimately going to want to go longer, but in the stable that he's currently resides in, there just is a lot of uncertainty about his future.
Yeah, if I believe right, I remember right from the Saudi Cup, this owner said he will not take horses away from Bob Baffert. So I think it would have to come down to a lawsuit. But he's certainly a good one, no doubt about that. It will be interesting to see where he shows up next and if they try 2 turns. And the one upside to this for me is you know what a big fan I was of Gunrunner. He ran the fastest speed figures I've ever made since I've been at TimeformUS. And man, what a sire he is turning out to be.
Yeah, there are some pretty nice sires that have emerged over the past few years, and Gunrunner certainly is right at the top of the list. It seems like there are others out there that can sire champions aside from Into Mischief, which I think is a good thing for horse racing right now. Let's finish up Santa Anita, Craig, by talking about one race from Sunday, one that I know that you wanted to mention, and that was a race, a turf race from Sunday's Cardinal Allowance event, won by Hong Kong Harry, a horse that was making his first start in the U.S. And frankly, Craig, I didn't know that pace upgrades could be this large on TimeformUS, because if you talk a little about the difference between the final time speed figure this horse ran and the TimeformUS speed figure that he got upgraded for pace.
Yeah, that was a pretty big one, and I actually did the figures for Sunday at for Santa Anita, which is something I don't always do, but I've been doing Sundays of late, and he got about the maximum upgrade you can possibly get, and it's just the difference in how he finished off the race versus the rest of the field was humongous. He won the race by 3 lengths, but he was just drawing away. He had been a few lengths back early. So he got the maximum upgrade you can because he was able to pass all the horses. And there is a cutoff. I don't want to get into the algorithm here, but he got a 126 TimeformUS speed figure. So that immediately to me spells stakes winner. Not really a surprise. He was 1-2 in the betting. He shipped in for Phil D'Amato, who certainly knows how to win some stakes races in Southern California. I doubt he'll be much of a price, but to my eye, he's one wherever he shows up next, assuming it's going to be in California, he's going to be very, very dangerous.
Yeah, this race was just essentially a 3/8 of a mile sprint to the wire for this horse. He stalked a very slow pace early, and when they asked him to go, I mean, he just took off. So he clearly has a big turn of foot on him, and as you said, the way that he finished, he certainly gave the feel of a horse that's going to do well in stakes company, so we'll see where they decide to go with him next time out. Let's move on to Gulfstream Park and talk about some of those Fountain of Youth undercard stakes races, beginning with a couple of races going the 1-turn mile distance, beginning with the Grade 2 Gulfstream Park Mile, won very impressively by Speaker's Corner. In the moment, Craig, this was a speed figure that I thought might come back pretty large. Came back a little bit lighter than I was maybe anticipating, but from a visual standpoint, you had to love the step forward that Speaker's Corner took in this race off his comeback in the Fred Hooper.
Yeah, he did everything he was asked to do. This was another race that wasn't quite as fast as what the timer said. I think this one was about 0.3 of a second slower, but it was a good effort from him. I'm not sure about the horses in behind him. I mean, we got Fearless again. I think we know what he is by now. He's pretty much a horse who's going to run in the teens around at this 1-turn mile, the 1 teens that is, and He wasn't as good this time. He certainly didn't ever look like a threat, and Speaker's Corner was really good. I'll be interested to see where he goes from here because I don't know if they want to pigeonhole him as a one-turn mile type of horse, but maybe a race like the Met Mile is in the cards. But I personally don't see any reason why he couldn't go further.
There are no shortage of talented dirt milers right now. I mean, if horses stay healthy, the Met Mile is looking like it could be a real war of a race. We'll see. There's a lot of uncertainty about horses like Flightline and what's going to happen to Life is Good after he comes back from Dubai, but it seems like there are some pretty talented horses that could potentially be pointing towards that race. Speaker's Corner, he did lose when they stretched him out to a mile and an eighth in the Discovery last year, but he did get a nice speed figure that day, so I don't think he necessarily ran that much worse going the longer distance. But he was visually impressive here. And what you said about having to retime that race, that kind of explains my confusion because on the surface of things, based on the published times, this race went 1.1 seconds faster than an allowance race 2 races earlier, won by Prevalence, which we'll talk about next. But as you're kind of getting at, the difference between those 2 races, I assume, was quite a bit smaller than that.
Yeah, for sure. As you intro that race, I will pull up the sheet to tell you exactly what it was. I don't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah, and Prevalence, I should mention, to make the connection, another horse that is campaigned by Godolphin, same owner as Speaker's Corner, although Prevalence, unlike Speaker's Corner, is trained by Bill Mott. Prevalence is trained by Brendan Walsh, and a horse that, Craig, I think they just kind of rushed along a little bit last year. He was visually impressive in winning his first couple starts against pretty suspect competition, and they tried him in the Wood Memorial. Seemed like that kind of messed him up for a little while. Didn't come back as the same horse originally, but seems like he's finally getting back on track based on this performance from Saturday.
Yeah, that was a good effort. As you said, on the clock, it showed a 1.1 second difference. But when I timed them from the gate, it was actually a lot closer than that, only about a 0.60 difference. So that would definitely explain that discrepancy. We can never have enough good horses, right? We always need them around and we have trouble. And it looks like he's on the right path. He was a horse that started out so promising, even though I know both of us were not really fans of him when he tried the Wood Memorial last year, and it didn't work out. But he's come back. His comeback race was just okay, but this one was definitely a big step forward. So I liked what I saw from him. He gets a 117 TimeformUS speed figure for the win, and I'll be interested to see where he shows up next because he definitely has some talent and has taken a step forward from that 3-year-old season.
Let's move on to a few of the turf races that took place on Saturday at Gulfstream Park, and there were quite a few of them in the stakes category. The Grade 2 Mac Diarmida going the marathon distance. Aban was bet down to heavy favoritism in this race, lower than even I anticipated, Craig. I think he went off at 3-5, which to me was just ludicrous for a horse that was coming off one big performance against legitimate company, getting a perfect trip, stepping up against arguably a tougher group. I know we both, we're not that enamored with him, but I don't think either one of us would have backed him at that kind of price. And no surprise to me that he was a little disappointing because Aban just not a naturally fast horse, and I think people just assumed he'd make the lead here from the rail, and Saez tried to hustle, but he was just going nowhere, and he got badly outrun and shuffled back and kind of took him out of the race, and the horse that was waiting in the wings to capitalize was Temple, who just always seems to run his race at Gulfstream Park.
Yeah, he does seem to be a horse for course. He was able to take advantage. This was one of those races, and there were many, so I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it, where they had timer problems at Gulfstream Park, nearly all the turf races. But I did time it from video. Luckily, there was another 1 3/8 race on the day that went at the same exact distance. So I was able to use those two to compare and make the speed figures. And Temple just seems to love this track. He got a nice 124 figure. Shamrocket, the runner-up, was able to revert to his turf form. So hopefully they don't run him on dirt or synthetic anytime soon because he certainly seems to be much better on the grass. So he got a 122 and Bond, he almost ran the figure he'd been running and winning. He just didn't get that nice trip he got when he got shuffled back. I actually thought he ran better than it's going to look if you watch the replay.
Yeah, I didn't think he ran badly at all. I just think that people overestimated his talents coming into this race. And as for Temple, I know this race got a big speed figure, the 123. I don't always put a lot of stock in those Gulfstream turf speed figures moving forward, especially when it comes to these older marathon runners. I think we've seen the past few years, sometimes races like the McDermott, what's the other one, the Pan American maybe, they don't always translate to some of the top races in New York later in the year, especially these Mike Maker horses that do well in the winter. Sometimes they're just, they're not able to achieve grade 1 status, even if the speed figures kind of suggest that they might be able to during the winter time. So we'll see what Temple ultimately does later in the year, but I think he is kind of that grade 2 level sort of horse.
Yeah, you make a good point about that. And I think more than anything, it's just the Gulfstream Park turf course, especially now where it's on the inside of that synthetic course. They can't put the railway out. And it's just a different kind of turf course than what you're going to see at other tracks later in the year.
Now, the Grade 3 Canadian Turf, a race that was carded early in the day, so it wouldn't be a part of the late pick 5 sequence or late pick 6 sequence with that heavy favorite Never Surprised involved. Actually, a race that was not dominated by Never Surprised because even though he took all the money, did not get the kind of trip that he needs to be successful. Craig, what did you make of the early tactics in this race? It looked like Saez was trying to get this horse a little bit forward. He wasn't hustling maybe as hard as we sometimes see him do. Never Surprised, though, a naturally fast horse, but it seemed like he simply got outrun to the lead.
Yeah, he did, and when you look at the pace figures, it's hard to fault them too much because the horse who did get the lead, Clear Vision, ran 144 early pace figures to get there. So I'm not sure what the right answer was for Never Surprised. Personally, obviously I'm about 100 plus pounds of ever being able to ride a horse. But he's the kind of horse that I would just take to the lead at all costs, no matter what happened and how hard I had to go, because we've seen what happens when he doesn't get it and he doesn't run well. Now, maybe that would have doomed him as well, but one thing I think we've learned with this horse is if he doesn't make the lead, he's not going to run very well, and he didn't here. And a couple others were able to take advantage, particularly Mira Mission, who seems to be really moving in the right direction on turf, keeps improving his speed figure every time out, and got a 121 for this win.
Yeah, it was nice to see this horse do well. Owned by the same connections that had a very good horse, probably their best turf horse, Get Stormy, pass away this past weekend, or at least that's when the news came out. And Mira Mission, a horse that was trained the early part of his career by Tom Bush, who I believe has since retired, and now he's with Ian Wilkes, and just seemed like one that's really come to his own now as a 4-year-old. He was a good allowance level 3-year-old, but it seems like since they've come off the freshening this year at Gulfstream Park, he's just taken that step forward. And as you were alluding to, he just got the perfect setup in this race. They went way too fast up front. Never Surprised, a horse that can go fast, but he can't do it when he's rating. And you saw coming by the stands the first time, as soon as Saez took a hold of him, he threw his head up in the air, the horse did, and you could just see he was not happy. That he did the exact same thing in the race where Irad Ortiz tried to rate him going back a year when I believe it was in a race like the Palm Beach at Gulfstream. He just is a horse that reacts badly to rating tactics. So you can't do that with him. As you said, you've got to get to the lead at all costs with Never Surprised. But that fast pace did set it up for a horse like Mira Mission. And we'll see how good he ultimately proves to be in this division later in the year. But 121, a solid speed figure. I would imagine, though, it was somewhat set up by the fast pace.
Yeah, I would agree. And I did see some people knocking Jose Ortiz for his ride on Clear Vision. But personally, I have no problem with it. When you look at his PPs, he's in need to lead too. And he basically played a game of chicken and won. Now, it didn't work out. He ran terribly and finished way back in the pack. But I can't fault a rider for doing what a horse needs to do to try to win. And really, it's not like it's going to set him back. It was just the shot he took.
Yeah, I know there are some people that are so brainwashed to believe that there's only one explanation for what Jose Ortiz did in this race that I'm not going to get into. But to me, the obvious explanation is what you said. I mean, he's riding a speed horse. The 1-5 favorite is a speed horse. So how do you win the race in that situation? The only way is to try to take that 1-5 shot out of his perfect trip. And he was the only one that could do it. He did it, and it backfired. I mean, the horse just wasn't good enough. But when you're riding a long shot, you have to take that risk. And he did it. It didn't work out. But I would like to see more riders try to make things interesting like that, rather than just concede the lead to a horse that's 1-5.
Yeah, exactly. And where does he finish if he does that? Probably last. So, as we've seen in spots like this.
Let's move on to another graded stakes on this card, the Very One Grade 3 event going that same mile and 3/8 distance that we saw in the Mac Armada. This one won by the Chad Brown trained Virginia Joy. Craig, a horse that we saw, I think, 3 times last year in the Chad Brown stable. She won her U.S. debut, then tried Stakes Company a couple times. I thought ran well in those races, but didn't win, and just seems like maybe she needed some time, and she's come back and appears to be in good form off the layoff.
Yeah, and she made the speed figure for Temple kind of what it was because she's been a really consistent horse. She always runs right around the 120 mark. She ran a 119 here, and just a good solid effort from her. Like you said, I'd like to see her transfer it because it wasn't able to win in Stakes Company in New York and the 2 times she tried, but she came pretty close, and I think she'll appreciate even more distance.
Chad Brown had some more success later in this card and another turf graded stakes, the Honey Fox, going the mile distance, won by In Italian. Craig, a horse that we had talked about on the forecast last week. I know that neither of us really expected her to go off at her 8-1 morning line, though she ended up getting bet all the way down to favoritism, which I know as a morning line maker sometimes happens when you peg a horse a little bit too high. The public just can't get enough of them. And she did deliver as the favorite in this race. Somewhat surprisingly, though, did it in gate-to-wire fashion, in a race that looked like they had some more speed signed on that could have been faster than her, but not the way it played out on the track.
Yeah, the only surprise to me was that she went wire to wire. I know we talked about this race, and I said she was a horse who could probably adapt to not being on the lead. But turned out somehow she didn't have to because it was an oddly run race to say the least, mostly because of Jouster. I have no idea what Luis Saez was doing, rating her back and forth. The race was pretty much over for her at that point. As we talked about, when you rate a speed horse, it usually doesn't work out very well. But In Italian took full advantage. She won with another improved speed figure up to a 117 here, and frankly, I don't know where the ceiling is with her. I think she probably still has some more in the tank, and it might sound a little silly, but I actually think she'll be better if she's able to rate in behind horses a little bit. I'm not talking about being a big closer or anything like that, but I mean in a race where she could get a good solid pace and tuck in third or fourth, because I really do like the way she finishes off her races.
Yeah, that's actually something I wondered about because it's not Chad Brown's MO to instruct a rider to go to the lead at all costs, and it seemed like Irad really wanted to get to the lead with this horse. So you almost wonder if Chad thinks that this is a horse that does need to be in front, because he typically, in a race like this, I mean, Chad's not a bad handicapper of races. He knows the tactics his horses are supposed to use. You would have thought that she would rate in this race, and they seemed intent on getting the lead. So maybe they believe she's a horse that needs to be in front. You never know. I agree, based on her first race, it seems like she can rate a little bit, though that was the worst race of her career. That was the only time she lost. Yeah, obviously took a step forward. Not really sure what to make of the horses in behind her. I thought Wakanaka put in a nice run for second. She was really doing the best closing at the end. I think the rider on Alms, Joel Rosario, just maybe took her a little bit too far back. She finished sixth in this race, but if you watch the replay, she's one that was really running at the end, just had way too much ground to make up. But Craig, we thought this one might be a race that kind of featured a pace meltdown, just not the way it played out on the racetrack.
No, and it's interesting. These are races, the 7th, 9th, and the 13th, which I'm sure we're going to talk about, were all run at the mile distances. All the timing was screwed up, and I timed them all from video, including the fractions, because I just don't want these races showing up without a sense of what the pace was. And I found it pretty interesting in Italian's race that, as you say, Irad was intent on getting the lead. You can see it in that early 128 pace figure. And once he did, everybody just kind of let him go. He was able to slow it down before finishing off the race. So mostly I just brought that up. I wanted people to know where the pace figures came from, because when you look at the official chart, there were no fractions. I do believe they're using mine now, so they will be in there. They might look a little slow numerically, but all these races were timed from the gate, from a standing start. So more like overseas fractions like you'll see in Hong Kong than what we're used to here.
And I think that's a good transition into the last mile race that we're going to talk about from Gulfstream on Saturday, the Grade 3 Here Comes the Bride. And Craig, I think you posted on Twitter some of those run-up fractions, and you can really see the difference in the fractions that Spenderella ran to win this Here Comes the Bride, as opposed to in Italian, in the Honey Fox. Just a completely different race flow, where they really sped up in the middle portion of this race, and you can obviously see that visually on the replay, as Spenderella and the horse that was chasing her, Lemieux, opened up about 7 lengths on the third place horse moving down the backstretch, and Lemieux had nothing left for the stretch drive, but Spenderella, she just kept going.
Yeah, this was an impressive race, and I understand the people that were a little surprised by me, and I think some others gave this a lower speed figure than what was expected. And for me, it was just one of those situations on turf where the pace was so quick, particularly to the half mile, that it made the time faster than what the horses would normally run under normal circumstances, a more reasonable pace. But don't let that take away from what we saw from Spenderella. I mean, that was a big effort from her. She gets a 112 overall speed figure from me. And what we do at Timeform US is we show you what this figure was before that pace adjustment. She actually got a 119 final time figure in here. So really good effort from her. But if people spend some time looking at the charts, I think they'll see why we make those pace adjustments. If you look at all the also rans in here, they all would have had career best figures by several points, despite not really running particularly good races. So it's not the perfect way to handle these things, but I think it does a pretty good job. And I think the speed figures we gave this race are pretty representative of what we saw in the horses, with the possible exception that maybe we are underrating Spenderella a little bit.
At 112, that's a pretty nice number for a 3-year-old filly in March. I don't want to say we're underrating her too much. I mean, that puts her clearly at the top of the class among the 3-year-olds on turf right now. And I think that the Timeform US speed figures, they really highlight what you were saying. I mean, she got a number that's 6 points faster than the runner-up Opalina, despite just winning this race by a length and a half. You would agree, Craig. I mean, she was much more than a length and a half the best in this race, because Opalina got the right kind of pace situation and just could not catch her. And Spenderella, I mean, even though the margin was just creasing at the end, Jose Ortiz was just kind of basically coasting home on this horse, never really asking her for much run. This is a talented one. She looked good in her debut, took a big step forward here. She's got a stellar pedigree. I think Graham Motion has a horse that you can rightly get pretty excited about.
Yeah, my point about the figure was, if you compare the times to that of in Italian, she probably should get a faster speed figure if you're only using the final times. But I think it would be foolish to think she would. If those two were to match up in a month head to head, I would take in Italian every time. And that's what we're trying to convey with our speed figures.
Let's just quickly finish up Gulfstream by mentioning one race from Wednesday. This was a 1.1 miles allowance race, and just want to mention it because from you, Craig, this race got the exact same speed figure as the Fountain of Youth. 3-year-old males going 1/16 of a mile farther. But I think the thing to note about this race is just the extreme aberrational pace situation, as a horse ran off on the front end and got some of the fastest early pace ratings you're going to see going this distance.
Yeah, this was one. It was a solid race. I know we have mentioned it on the forecast that a couple horses came back to run very well out of it, but I do think they were enhanced a little bit by the pace, shall we say? As you said, it was pretty off the charts fast. It was a race where just that runoff leader had nothing left later on. And I do think it probably influenced that final time a little bit. We don't make those kind of downgrades on dirt because, after all, speed is a weapon on the dirt. I mean, make no doubt about it. I actually went and timed this because I couldn't believe the sub 22 opening quarter mile. But it was actually fine, and that horse quit as you would expect it would. But I don't want to take too much away from the winner because he's progressing, moving in the right direction. Skippy Longstocking got a 107 Timeform US speed figure, and I wouldn't be surprised if they take a shot with him in stakes races next time out.
Yeah, I agree with what you said about the pace of this race. Maybe inflating the final speed figure a little bit. Even though this race, I get why it got the same speed figure as the Fountain of Youth. I'd probably prefer the Fountain of Youth horses, but I do think it's just an interesting discussion point that both of these races took place on the same week, and this one just an interesting one to go back and watch because of those crazy early tactics. I mean, Julien Leparoux, I mean, maybe he just couldn't rate that horse. I don't know. It didn't seem like he was making that much effort to. But King Cab, a horse that is very fast, I was surprised they ran him a mile and an eighth, but he's one that you might want to look for when they finally turn him back in distance. Craig, let's finish up by talking about a couple of races from Aqueduct. And you kind of mentioned it early on the show that Aqueduct on Saturday, for you, not the most difficult day to make speed figures. I was kind of thinking you'd have a little more trouble with it because I was kind of stuck on that first race of the day and kept thinking about it. But when you do what you did, breaking that race out and taking the rest of the day as making sense, or maybe, rather I should say you did not break that race out. But let's talk about that first race of the day at Aqueduct from Saturday, because it was so visually impressive. A New York bred maiden event going the 6.5 furlongs, won by the Ray Handel trained Disco Pharaoh. I guess this race was kind of a dilemma for you.
This one was, and I'm still not sure I made the right decision, to be honest. It was a race that was, it looked visually impressive, and on my worksheet, it stuck out as not fitting at all with the other races. And it was just a really tough call. It was one where I'm still not sure I'm going to stick with it. I may go back and break it out because the more I look at the chart and the 2, 3, 4 finishers, and maybe even 5 all regressing significantly, I think I made a mistake, to be honest. And I don't mind admitting those things. It's not like these horses have run back. It's something I will change beforehand. And it's something I'm usually not leery to do. I've said before I like to get a look in the chart. And I suspect that Disco Pharaoh ran a lot faster than that 103 we have it as right now.
Yeah, it wouldn't be the first time that the track changed after the first race of the day at Aqueduct. We could put it that way. I know you know that very well. It's not one that I had a really strong feeling about. I guess in these situations, I'm always of kind of the viewpoint, give the horse the higher number and then see where the chips fall later on when they run back. But I did tweet like right after the race, Disco Pharaoh is going to get a gigantic speed figure because kind of knowing the horses that finish behind them and how consistent they are. I mean, I know the runner-up was coming off a layoff, but even the third place finisher, Scherzando, or Scherzando, a horse that typically runs speed figures in the low 90s, high 80s, just kind of figuring those horses ran the races in behind. Disco Pharaoh, he won this race by nearly 20 lengths, and he looked amazing doing it. I mean, this horse just powered away from the field late. I mean, he's bred to be a good one. He's by American Pharaoh, and he's a horse that in his one prior dirt race did have a bit of a trip and looked like a horse that kind of had to figure things out. And boy, it seems like he has figured things out. And whatever the speed figure turns out to be, I think we won't know for sure what's the right call until these horses do run back, or particularly the winner runs back. But is one that I'll be looking for with a great deal of anticipation.
Yeah, and I'll certainly tweet that out after we do the links. It's one I spent a lot of time on this morning, and yeah, it's just one of those tough calls, but I think I made the wrong one initially. But as I've said, I really like to look at it in the chart. I can look at it on my worksheet, but it's just something about the chart that gives a better visual. And for me, it's hard to imagine literally every horse in the race outside of him taking a big regression, particularly when he wins by as much as he does. So we'll see what he does. It's one we'll monitor going forward, but yeah, there's definitely going to be a change.
And we'll just finish things up with the race that took place right after Disco Pharaoh, which immediately kind of threw cold water on my idea that Disco Pharaoh was automatically going to get a gigantic speed figure, because I could tell just from comparing the times of the first two races that this second race came up pretty fast, going the mile distance for the 3-year-old maidens. But I mean, this race actually did compare pretty favorably to the Gotham and the Busher later on, as electability got the job done here off the long layup for Chad Brown. And the winner and the runner-up, they could just be some pretty nice 3-year-olds.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I mean, not a big shock, right? That a Chad Brown and a Todd Pletcher showed improvement as early season 3-year-olds with a big gap back to third. Electability got a 110 time form US speed figure, long term a 109. They're both pretty big jumps, but they're expected and not out of the ordinary. So this is a speed figure that definitely will not be changing. The change I make in the first race it won't have any effect on the others because I didn't use that first race when I made the variant for these races. So I think a couple good horses in here, and they both showed some talent.
Yeah, electability, horse with a nice pedigree by Quality Road. I think on the dam side, he's related to a horse named Long Haul Bay, a good sprinter that Chad Brown had a number of years ago. So we'll see what they do with him, but I thought a good return off the layoff for him. And as for Long Term, who was second, a horse that has now finished second in all 4 of his career starts, he's run into some decent horses that have beaten him, but turning into a little bit of a money burner for Todd Pletcher, though he clearly does have some talent if he can ever get over that hump and win a race. Craig, those are all the races we're going to discuss on the podcast this week. I know that there are some that we left off that got big speed figures, but just so much to mention. I know there were a couple of races from Gulfstream Park. Kamari returned for Wesley Ward. There was a fast Ward runner on Sunday at Gulfstream, but I mean, sometimes on weekends like this with so much racing, it just gets a little bit overwhelming. There's too much to take in, but definitely an exciting weekend in racing, and I think we're going to have some more of those as we proceed on through the rest of March. That's typically the case.
Yeah, no doubt. And for figures that we don't talk about, people can always ask me on Twitter. I'm usually pretty good about responding. And heck, I'll give a figure for a maiden claimer if somebody wants to know. And they often do because we have people that own and train these horses and are interested. I'm always happy to share. But yeah, we can't talk about every single race. I can tell you, I'm tired of talking today.
Well, we'll finish things up, Craig. We will be back for the TimeformUS forecast later in the week. The Tampa Bay Derby is taking place on Saturday, so we'll see how that card comes up, if there's a sequence worth talking about that day. I know there might also be some races at Oaklawn worth talking about, so we'll see how those respective cards come up and which sequence we do prefer. So we'll say something about that, but we will talk about one of those on the forecast a couple days from now. Remember, if you want to listen to these DRF podcasts, you just check them out on DRF.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Craig, thanks as always. Kind of a long one this week, but we'll wrap it up now. Everybody, thanks to you for listening all the way to here, and tune in for that TimeformUS forecast later in the week.